New York has seen its fair share of crime stories, but few cases have sparked as much outrage, sorrow, and controversy as the death of Robert Brooks. On December 9, 2024, inside the walls of Marcy Correctional Facility, 43-year-old Robert Brooks, a man serving time for a crime committed nearly a decade prior, was brutally beaten. Hours later, he was dead. At first, the prison's official report stated he had died from a medical emergency. But as investigators peeled back the layers of this case, they uncovered a horrifying reality. Robert Brooks had been murdered. But who was Robert Brooks before prison? What led to his incarceration? And how did his final moments spiral into one of the most controversial deaths in New York's prison system? This is the untold story of Robert Brooks, a man who sought redemption, justice, and a second chance, but never got it. Robert Brooks was born on May 15, 1981 in Rochester, New York. He was raised by a single mother, Carla Brooks, who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. His father, Michael Brooks, had abandoned the family when Robert was just 5, leaving Carla to raise him alone. Despite their financial struggles, Carla was determined to give her son the best life possible. She enrolled him in school, ensured he had food to eat, and encouraged him to pursue his dreams. And Robert had big dreams. From a young age, he showed a natural talent for music. He played the piano by ear and had an incredible singing voice. He was known as the kid who could turn any moment into a melody, filling his neighborhood with music. But life in low-income Rochester neighborhoods wasn't easy. Gangs ran the streets, drugs were rampant, and violence was a part of everyday life. Robert stayed away from trouble for most of his childhood, but by the time he turned 16, things took a different turn. At 16, Robert dropped out of high school. His mother had fallen ill, and with no father around, the responsibility of providing for the family fell on him. With no diploma and no job prospects, Robert turned to the one thing that promised quick money: the streets. At first, it was small things, delivering packages, keeping an eye out for the police. But soon he was selling drugs, running with local gang members, and getting into fights. Carla begged him to stop, but Robert saw no way out. He told her, "Ma, it's just until we get back on our feet." But the streets don't let go so easily. In 2015, Robert met Lisa Hernandez, a woman who would change his life in ways he never expected. Lisa was beautiful, smart, and ambitious. She worked as a nurse and was everything Robert wanted to be: successful, independent, and free from the struggles of the streets. He fell in love fast, and for a while, she became his escape from the world of crime. He dreamed of starting fresh, leaving the streets, and building a future with her. But their relationship was far from perfect. Lisa was controlling and jealous, often accusing Robert of cheating. Meanwhile, Robert was hot-tempered and struggling with his own demons. Their fights were loud, aggressive, and often violent. Then came the night that changed everything. On September 3, 2015, Robert and Lisa had their biggest fight yet. Lisa accused Robert of seeing another woman, and Robert, already under the influence of alcohol, lost control. In a fit of rage, he grabbed a knife from the kitchen and stabbed Lisa, once in the arm, once in the side. As soon as he realized what he had done, panic set in. He tried to stop the bleeding, called 911, and stayed by her side until paramedics arrived. Lisa survived, but Robert's fate was sealed. Robert's trial in 2016 was swift and unforgiving. Lisa testified against him, and despite his genuine remorse, the court showed no mercy. He was convicted of first-degree assault and sentenced to 12 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 8 years. As he was led out of the courtroom, he looked at his mother one last time. "I'm sorry, Ma." Her eyes were filled with tears as she whispered, "I love you, baby." Prison was a new world for Robert Brooks, one that operated on an entirely different set of rules. Survival was everything. The rigid schedule, the confined space, the unspoken hierarchy among inmates. It was a system designed to break even the strongest of minds. At first, Robert struggled to adjust. He had always been independent, used to making his own decisions. But here, everything was dictated for him. The first few months were the hardest. He witnessed brutal fights, extortion, and power struggles between different prison factions. Even the smallest misunderstandings could lead to violence. Fights, gang rivalries, and survival tactics became a part of daily life. Robert tried to stay away from trouble, but in prison, staying neutral was nearly impossible. The pressure to choose a side was immense. Gangs controlled everything: who you could talk to, where you could sit in the cafeteria, and even what jobs you were allowed to have. At one point, Robert found himself in a dangerous altercation when he refused to be part of a smuggling operation. He was cornered in the showers, beaten, and left with a broken rib and a deep gash on his forehead. But he refused to retaliate. He refused to become what the prison system expected him to be, a hardened criminal. Over time, he changed. He made a choice to survive on his own terms. He joined prison education programs, earning his GED. Robert had never finished high school, but now, behind bars, he realized the value of education. He attended every class he could, absorbing knowledge like a sponge. He became a mentor, helping younger inmates find purpose. Many of the younger prisoners were trapped in cycles of violence and gang culture. Robert made it his mission to help them see another way. He encouraged them to take classes, write letters to their families, and think about life beyond prison. He rediscovered his love for music, writing songs about pain, regret, and hope. Robert had always been musically gifted, and prison gave him time to reconnect with that part of himself. He wrote lyrics that resonated with the struggles of those around him. His songs became anthems within the prison walls, offering moments of escape for those who listened. By 2024, he was just 2 years away from parole. His record had improved, and he had earned the trust of several correctional officers who saw him as a model inmate. He had hope. But in prison, hope is dangerous. It makes you stand out. And in a place built on power and dominance, standing out can get you killed. Then came the transfer to Marcy Correctional Facility, a decision that would change everything. Marcy was known for its strict discipline and high-security environment, housing some of the state's most dangerous inmates. It was a place where hope rarely survived. The transfer didn't make sense. Robert had a clean record, no behavioral issues, and was close to parole. Typically, inmates with good behavior were moved to lower security facilities, not to a prison like Marcy, which had a reputation for its violent atmosphere and corrupt officers. Robert had no idea what awaited him. As he stepped into Marcy Correctional Facility, he couldn't have imagined that he had just entered the final chapter of his life. On December 9, 2024, Robert arrived at Marcy Correctional Facility early in the morning. It was a routine transfer, but something felt off from the moment he stepped inside. He was led through the processing area, where new inmates were typically searched, assigned a cell, and given an orientation on the prison's rules. But for Robert, the process was anything but normal. The guards were hostile from the start. They singled him out, making snide remarks about his good behavior and how that wouldn't mean anything at Marcy. He was separated from other incoming inmates and taken to a room where there were no cameras. The officers leading him inside were some of Marcy's most feared guards, men with a history of violence and corruption. Then, he was taken to a medical examination room and seated on an examination table while still handcuffed. Witnesses later described that the right side of Brooks's face was already bleeding. Then, the assault began. One officer forced a white object into Brooks's mouth, while another held his throat.
We see one officer shove a white substance, presumably a cloth or tissue, into Brooks's mouth, while the second officer locks his hands around Brooks's neck just before the third officer begins beating him with his shoe and punching his legs.
Multiple officers started striking the restrained Brooks in his face, torso, groin, and buttocks. Several officers stood as passive bystanders, making no effort to intervene. 2 officers lifted Brooks's unresponsive body by his shirt in an attempt to throw him out of a nearby window. After the failed attempt, Brooks, now completely motionless, was placed back on the examination table while an officer conducted a sternal rub in a feeble attempt to revive him. The officers identified as being involved included CO Anthony Farina, Sergeant Glenn Trombley, CO Nicholas Anzalone, CO Matthew Gallagher, Sergeant Michael Marshaw, CO Christopher Walters, CO Nicholas Kiefer, and others. Within hours of his arrival, Robert was dead. Prison officials initially claimed it was a medical emergency, suggesting he had suffered a heart attack. Surveillance footage later revealed correctional officers dragging Robert into a secluded room. He looked nervous but didn't resist. The moment the door shut, the beating began. Multiple guards punched, kicked, and stomped on him. One officer used a baton to repeatedly strike him in the ribs. Robert gasped for air as one officer held him down by the neck. His face turned red, then purple. The attack lasted over 10 minutes. He was struck over 40 times, his ribs were fractured, and his internal organs severely damaged. When they finally stopped, Robert was barely breathing, but instead of calling for medical assistance, they simply left him on the floor. An hour later, when prison medics were finally called, it was too late. When news of Robert's death reached his family, they were devastated. His mother, Carla Brooks, collapsed upon hearing the news, screaming that it wasn't possible. His younger sister, Jasmine, who had always looked up to him, was inconsolable. His family's grief quickly turned to rage when they received the official prison report, stating that Robert had died from cardiac arrest caused by pre-existing conditions. But his family knew that was a lie. Robert had never complained about heart problems. He was healthy, active, and strong before the transfer. Something wasn't right. Determined to find out the truth, they demanded an independent autopsy. The results were shocking. Robert had suffered blunt force trauma to his head, chest, and abdomen. His ribs were broken. There were clear signs of asphyxiation. This wasn't a medical emergency, it was murder. When the results were released, the story exploded. Within days, protests erupted outside Marcy Correctional Facility. Activists, former inmates, and grieving families held up signs that read, "Justice for Robert" and "Stop Prison Abuse." The beating received widespread condemnation. New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision Commissioner Daniel F. Martuscello III stated, "It is not enough to simply condemn this horrific act and then go back to business," emphasizing that his department would now audit body cameras to ensure they remained activated at correctional facilities. However, NYS-DOC-ES declined to comment when it was revealed that at least 3 officers involved in the beating, Anzalone, Trombley, and Farina, had documented prior histories of violence and abuse against prisoners. On December 21, 2024, Governor Kathy Hochul ordered the firing of 13 officers and 1 nurse involved in the incident following an internal review. The Aniskapa Police Union, representing the involved officers, called the events a disgrace to their profession. The FBI Albany Field Office launched a federal investigation into Brooks's killing on December 28, signaling the gravity of the case. However, because the New York Attorney General's office represents state employees facing legal action, Attorney General Letitia James had to recuse herself from the case. Onondaga County District Attorney William J. Fitzpatrick was appointed as special counsel in her place. On December 27th, body-worn camera footage of the attack was made public. The footage had no audio. The 4 officers wearing body cams had them powered on but not activated, meaning only silent video was captured. The video showed officers dragging Brooks into a secluded area, where he was surrounded and viciously beaten. The autopsy report, released in February 2025, confirmed his death was a murder, caused by compression of the neck and multiple blunt force injuries. On February 20, 2025, Governor Kathy Hochul announced that prison workers would be arrested and charged with murder. A grand jury formally indicted multiple officers on charges of murder, manslaughter, gang assault, and tampering with evidence. At least 6 correctional officers, including all 5 directly involved in Brooks's fatal beating, were among those charged. The Albany Times-Union later reported that nearly a dozen officers had already been arrested by New York State Police. In total, 17 Corrections Department employees, including 4 sergeants, 11 correction officers, and 2 nurses, were suspended and facing discipline.
14 staff members, mostly sergeants and corrections officers, were suspended without pay as of December 21st, this in connection to a brutal beating of an inmate at Marcy Correctional Facility earlier this month.
With the legal battle unfolding, the fight for justice for Robert Brooks was far from over.